Innovation is everything in engineering today. And in this episode of the Engineering Career Coach, I have with me Nick Vigener. Nick is a senior principal and chief technical officer at Simpson Gumpertz Heger, otherwise known as SGH. And Nick's going to talk about how SGH is using innovation to not only serve their clients better, but to serve the engineering industry better in a way that engineers can connect with SGH and leverage what they're building to make their individual work better and more innovative. Let's jump right in. All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest on to the show today. Nick Vigener is Senior Principal and Chief Technical Officer at SGH. Nick, welcome to the Engineering Career Coach podcast.
Thank you, Anthony. It's great to be here.
So, Nick, maybe we could start off by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role as the CTO at SGH.
Good thing. So I've been at Simpson Gumpertz Heger or SGH since the 1990s. So I basically grew up in the organization. This is only my second job. I worked at a consulting firm in Cambridge, SEA Consultants, for a bit once I got out of school. And that was a great first job where I really learned a lot. But then I joined SGH to do more building rehabilitation work, which is something that they were pretty strong at. And over the years, the SGH was able to keep me pretty engaged and pretty excited about what I was doing every step of the way. So I've been here for over 25 years, and I've started a new office in Washington, D.C. I came back to Boston, and really the fun part and the most gratifying part, if you're with an organization that long, is you watch people grow up, and people that are hired out of school as kids, as 22-year-olds, they're now leaders, which is fantastic. So the best way I can put it is, if you have a technical position at SGH, if you're an engineer or an architect or a scientist, it's really my job to make sure that you are successful here, that you are well led, and that you have a good career here. So we call that our chief technical officer. Sometimes I get confused for a chief technology officer, which is, people wonder if I'm in charge of all things IT, and I can assure you I'm terrible at that. I'm terrible at computers, but fortunately I have 4 kids that help me through those challenges, including a son who's a freshman in comp sci. So
there you go.
That's where I am.
That's great. And kind of like one question as a follow-up to that, something that I see in a lot of consulting firms is, the idea that you kind of have this fork in the road between a technical and a managerial professional where, I think sometimes there may be pressure for people that you have to go into management and consulting, but I think we all know that you need, true subject matter experts and technical professionals in our field. So I'm just curious as to your, within your role, is that something that you think about and how you can, make it clear to people that there is a technical, track in our company, and we want to make, we want to support you on that? It sounds like that's kind of what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes natural to almost everybody, because part of enjoying the technology and enjoying the problem solving is helping others solve their problems. So pretty much on day 2 of your job, you'll wind up coaching people, you wind up helping people with their work. And the more you grow up in an organization, the more of that you'll be doing just naturally. And for us, it is, we see that as a natural evolution of your technical career. And we train you and encourage you to take on responsibility for leading others. So we have career paths that are technically oriented, but most of our technical staff at SGH also grow up to be leaders of people, because this is really how we grow the organization, and more importantly, how we grow the people around us and lead them to satisfying careers. And as I said just a few minutes ago, really the best part of being in leadership and being with an organization for 25 plus years is that you see people that you grew be successful and be technical and leaders of people in their own right, which which is something that's really fun to see.
Yeah, no, that's great. I agree with that 100%. I mean, I think if you're going to be successful in our field as a technical professional, you're going to need to interact with and lead people. So it's great that, SGH is kind of helping technical professionals to be well-rounded, if you will, because that's important in our field. So Nick, SGH has a rich history of innovation, testing, research, and kind of verifying new approaches. Could you maybe share some examples of how SGH has embraced this culture of innovation and, push the engineering profession forward in this sense?
Innovation and advancing the engineering profession is really part of our DNA. So you may know that we are founded by three professors, Werner Gumpertz, Howard Simpson, and Frank Heger, who basically took their MIT professorships and moved them up Mass Ave into Cambridge and started a consulting firm. And it's really fun when you talk to them. They all passed away now, but I got to meet them and actually work with them. And I remember talking to Howard in one of his later years and asked him about, what it was like to start an engineering firm and some of the things that they wrestled with. And he told me the story where he said, the Department of Defense came to us and they said, can you figure out a way, if we have a dense forest canopy, if we can drop a large piece of fabric on there and turn that into an airport for helicopters? And, I told Howard, that is the weirdest thing that I've ever heard. But those are the kind of things that they wrestled with and early on in their careers. And so you can tell that innovation and looking at strange problems was part of what they've always done and what we've always done. And they essentially started what I refer to as a problem-solving machine. And later, in probably, 40 or 50 years ago, SGH, the next generation, Glenn Bell and Tom Schwartz, they were the engineers for the Epcot Center, Sphere. And you can imagine that. It's one of the most iconic engineering structures in the US. And, used a lot of very innovative approaches, for its day, very advanced computer modeling of structural systems, prefabrication of components that were brought to the site and then had to fit together in a complex shape. Tom Schwartz, who led our building technology group, designed a waterproof skin that had 1 million different penetrations for the structural system, internal gutter system. So very, very unusual stuff for its days and really driving the profession forward. Really more recently, one of our partners in San Francisco, Ron Hamburger, designed the repair for the Millennium Tower. Just one of the most visible, really engineering issues in the world that you've read about. And one of the things that he taught me and that I observed, that it doesn't just take skill and good ideas, but it also takes a lot of courage to innovate, because he came up with a very innovative repair to a building performance problem. And what I noticed there, if it's very big, if it's very unusual, if it's very visible, there are a lot of engineers who have not spent the same time that you have looking at that problem. And, they may criticize you. They may criticize you, especially if things don't go well. And it's all the more gratifying that eventually, when they do go well, you're vindicated. But that has taught me that, it takes a lot of courage, in addition to skill and experience and good ideas to innovate in our profession.
Yeah, that's great. And Glenn and Ron, certainly leaders in the field. We've had them on our structural engineering channel podcast, and they've done a lot of great stuff. And I think just in general around innovation, I think what's important today is that firms in our industry have to innovate. I mean, I don't think that there's another way, because if you don't, you're going to be just left behind at this point. Everything's changing so quickly. Technology's changing so quickly. So I think for those of you out there too, in your careers, like, you need to consider your organization's innovation strategy, because I think it impacts your own career. Because are you going to have access to the right tools? Are you going to be on the leading edge? Are you going to be involved in some of these exciting projects, which is an important thing to consider. And I think the other thing that Nick said that's important is engineering organizations, engineering firms, they get paid to solve problems, but there's many different solutions for a problem. And so if your firm is kind of keeping up to date on technology and innovation, you're probably going to have some of the best solutions to these problems, which can keep you, again, as a leader in the field. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in our industry for innovation from the individual standpoint and from the organizational standpoint. And so it's interesting to hear some of the things that SGH is doing. And I think for those of you out there, it's something you need to kind of consider in your career and how it's going to kind of come into play, because it is here. It's here to stay for sure. So, Nick, SGH has kind of this what's possible mentality, which is really cool. Always questioning kind of the why to advance the field. So talk about how this mindset really influences the work that you do at SGH and some of the solutions like we're talking about that you're able to bring to your clients. And how can our listeners or, engineering professionals out there kind of adopt this mindset in their own practices?
Yeah. So, as an engineer and as a problem solver, you have to bring, it's sort of like athletic coaching. You have to start with the conviction that you can find a way to win. And in engineering, you have to start with the conviction that you can find a way to solve the problem. And that's a critical piece that you have to bring to the job. So, for example, we do a lot of work with architects that design very innovative structures, very unusual structures. And I'll give you a hypothetical example, because it's something that engineers, we have to find our way around. An architect comes to you and says, I want to build this spherical structure. It's going to be translucent and on a 30-foot cantilever. And your first impulse as an engineer is almost always, oh gosh, that is super hard. Why don't we make it a box, and why don't we make it out of concrete? So that's how probably 90% of the profession looks at it. And, you have to find a way. And this is really what's fun about it, because you get to be around creative people. You get to be around fun people, very interesting things. You have to find a way to get yourself to a point where you say, I can find a solution to this problem. I can find a technical solution. Because fundamentally what we do is we take an architect's vision, like, Epcot Center started out as a twinkle in an architect's eye. And we find the technology to support that vision, which is really great. The other thing that as a professional, you have to keep in mind, when you're looking at innovation, or as a leader, when you're looking at innovation, is that innovation doesn't come through quantum leaps. The quantum leaps are the things that we see, but through, particularly in a traditional field, through constantly trying things, seeing how things work. And it's the accumulation of small innovations that eventually give you much bigger ideas, much bigger, better tools. As you start a new process, you look how things work, you get to change, you get to tweak, and it consistently gets better. So, you have to approach every day as in, I'm going to try something new, I'm going to see how it works, I'm going to let it enrich my profession.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's a really good analogy for one's career, right? You're not going to you don't wake up one day and you're a principal in an engineering firm. It's something that you've been working on for years and years. And you tried working on a certain type of project, you didn't like it. So you went to a different department, you'd like that one. Then you become an expert in that field, and maybe you get your license and a certification. And so I think it's, having a good plan in your career, taking it one step at a time, doing the right things, and, showing up to work every day is how you're going to get to where you want to go, most likely. And I think that same parallel with innovation is in your own effort. So that's a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Nick, can you share, SGH does collaborate with engineers to kind of provide, of course, practical solutions, support. What advice do you have for engineers that want to kind of leverage collaboration in their own projects, right? I think this idea of collaborating in the world we live in today is such a big deal, because we need to do it to work together. Talk a little bit about collaboration in our world.
So the way I look at it, innovation really comes and collaboration really comes and gets most fruitful is if you see something, do something clever in their own practice, and then you take that and you adapt it to what you're doing. So it is super important that you have your eyes open every day, what people around you are doing and what skills and what technical ideas they bring to the job, and then you creatively apply that to what you're doing. And what we do to foster that with our people is we have a ton of internal training programs that are open to everybody, not just engineers, architects, scientists. They're open to everybody that works with us. And the idea here is really that we see what others are doing, and that has a couple of benefits. If I'm as an engineer, I'm fundamentally there to do right by the client, to solve the client's problem. If I can solve more of their problems because my colleague in the next office over is good at that, the client is going to be very happy. The other thing that happens is that the more skill you pull into a job, the better your product is going to be, the better your work is going to be, and also the more exciting it gets because the project gets bigger. And just gets more satisfying for everybody involved because nobody wants to do the same thing over and over and over again. We want to solve bigger, more complex, more unusual problems. And, if we have a community of 650 or 700 people that, all have solved unusual problems, and I can pull that into my project, it gets pretty fun. It gets pretty exciting. So we really double down on the knowledge sharing. We have a number of different offices, and we try to make sure that everybody in every office knows what the others are doing and are able to bring that to their project.
That's great. Nick, the Applied Science and Research Center, or ASRC, plays a significant role in enhancing SGH's technical capabilities. Could you tell us about what that is, how it came about, and why it was named Applied Science and Research as opposed to just a lab?
Mm-hmm. So our Applied Science and Research Center is really also part of our heritage. Fundamentally engineers. We'd like to have some tactile experience with the material. We like to play with it. We like to take it apart. We like to test it, to establish engineering properties. So this is really part of one of the earliest days of SGH, to have some sort of facility where we work on materials, mainly to inform our investigative group. And a few decades ago, that really grew because the firm brought in a principal who was a chemist, not an engineer. Grew up in General Electric, and he brought a scientist's rigor to the team. And he established procedures. He hired technical staff who could perform repeatable tests, brought in a lot of equipment, and it just became much more formalized from sort of a playtime makerspace kind of shop into a real laboratory. And we were able to solve a lot bigger, more unusual problems with this new tool, and hired scientists to bring more expertise to the job whenever we needed it. So we now have metallurgists, we have petrographers, we have chemists, really to solve unusual problems. And over time, this grew not just to enrich our engineering, but to be its own standalone, really entity that had its own notoriety and capability. And with our new building, we put it front and center. So if you walk into SGH now, the first thing that you see is the Applied Science and Research Lab. You see our equipment there. You see people working. You see people engaged in problem solving and testing. So it has really grown. It really outgrew its humble roots of being an engineer's playground into its own standalone research center. And we named it the Applied Science and Research Center. And we went looking for leadership, and we hired a lab director, Norm Perkins, who runs the Applied Science and Research Group, and gave it a more forceful professional mission. So that's where we are with it now. And it has really grown from supporting engineering to being its own entity that draws people, that draws business, and draws expertise to us.
That's great. I mean, and again, going back to like innovation, I mean, you could have a firm that maybe does structural engineering, but you could have a firm that does structural engineering and is also investigating new materials and, you know, different things that you can utilize within those structural solutions. So I think that definitely goes back to the innovation side of what you talked about earlier on, which is great. For engineers, Nick, that are looking to maybe enhance their own work, how can they effectively utilize the tested approaches and the insights that are generated by the ASRC in their own projects? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about our knowledge sharing program. So we are pretty active in making sure everybody knows what capabilities we have so they can bring those to their job. So one of the examples I had a few years ago, we had a project at a museum that had a big stone facade with natural stone that was failing. And we struggled a bit with it to figure out what was going on. And then one of our petrographers actually solved the problem. And it was unusual because the stone had undergone pretty rigorous testing. And he determined that really the reason that the stone was failing, the standard tests on stone that made on pretty small samples, but the samples, so the actual stone that was used is pretty big. And he determined that there was a size effect, though, even though the small samples performed well, the larger actual material on the building did not. And you have to know where that expertise is, and you've seen it before. You have to have seen it before. So I knew, and we knew that we had a petrographer experienced in stone in the house and who could solve this problem. So one of the things that we are really big on is bringing our staff into the lab, into the Applied Science and Research Center to understand what is going on there, understand what the capabilities are. We also use it quite a bit to enrich our profession. So we know we're in Boston, a lot of universities, a lot of technical colleges here, engineering departments. And we bring people into the lab. We bring students, we bring professors into the lab to see what they can do, and they go back and they take some ideas back to their own research. So we had a really interesting and fun experience, probably a year or two ago, where a student at WPI knew what we were doing. He had been an intern with us. And he had this pretty unusual idea to test the air leakage rate on a van that he had outfitted, a school bus, and he brought that to us. And we had the equipment. We tested. We did air leakage testing on this vehicle. It was one of the strangest things we've ever done, but it was really interesting because here comes a young person with an interesting idea, and who knows, you might be looking at the next big thing. So we bring a lot of unusual ideas in there. Another example that we have that is the lab has a wet room where we can test building assemblies, expose them to water spray. We can have temperature variations. We can produce very cold, very, very hot temperatures to stress the materials. And we had an unusual project where we had to determine why a particular roof assembly was leaking, under what conditions. And we were able to recreate that roof assembly in our lab, build a sloping roof with shingles and underlayment, and then subject it to water spray, build all that in our lab, and understand how the material was performing, how things were doing. So it is pretty powerful in the way we make sure we apply it correctly. People know how to apply it is by spreading, awareness among our people and the community, the engineering community at large.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I think whenever you create an outlet or an avenue like the research center, you just create opportunities. You create an avenue for these opportunities where this intern or this student can reach out to you now because they're aware of the center, and they can bring an idea to the table, and you could decide whether or not you want to investigate it. But I think creating these opportunities today in our industry is really important. And I think the research center is certainly one of them for sure. And I think that, those of you out there listening, I think you should look to create opportunities like that in your career, however you can do that, because, you want to create these avenues to bring collaboration, bring innovation together, because that's, I think, how we're going to solve some of the bigger problems that we have to solve in the world going forward as engineers. So, Nick, talk a little bit about the importance of the expertise of one's staff in contributing to the success of a company's research and innovation efforts, because it takes a lot of people.
Well, the expertise of our staff is really the only thing that we have. And that's why our number one mission is to keep our staff trained, engaged, and happy at what they're doing. So, because that's really, the skill, the can-do attitude, the ideas that our staff bring to us, it's really our only capital. Our CFO, Marty Mullins, is fond of saying, all our assets walk out the door at 5 p.m. So we spend a lot of effort at training and teaching our staff. So I already talked about the internal training programs that we have. A few other things that we do to make sure that our staff are, well trained is we have an internal staff exchange program. So it's sort of interesting whenever you contemplate a problem that you have, in your own, here in Boston, I might have a Boston problem, but it's very likely that somebody in Los Angeles in our office has solved that problem 10 years ago. And so we move staff around to make sure that there is consistency of practice, and we know where the expertise lies, so we can bring that expertise to the job. The other thing that is very important to us, and that is really part of the academic heritage of the firm, is we look for all our people to be engaged in benefiting their professional community. So early on in a person's career, that might be volunteering at a school, talking about your profession, or going back to your alma mater and giving a guest lecture on something that you've learned as a young professional. Later on, it may be serving on technical committees or code writing committees, or publishing, participating in professional societies. And that's where a lot of innovation comes from. This is a really twofold effect. It engages our staff because they know we are invested in their training, in their well-being, in their professional growth and development. But it also is tremendously important to our work and to innovation, because all innovation comes from seeing what others in the marketplace are doing, seeing what others in adjacent fields are doing, and bringing those good ideas to your work. And that is only possible if you look beyond your own office, beyond your own cubicle, and interact with the technical community out there. So you can harvest those good ideas that you see, and you can bring them to your own practice and have them enrich your own problem solving.
That's great. And I think that point you mentioned about kind of moving the staff around is an important one, because I think that one of the things that firms struggle with today is information sharing and knowledge sharing across an organization, because, things are moving fast. But like you said, there's probably someone in another office or another location probably has information that can save you days potentially, right? And so making sure that that information can get shared appropriately across your organization is something that I think is a really important, aspect of growing a firm today, and having some kind of process or structure or community or avenue in place to allow that sharing to happen is just so important. I see it so many times in companies where there's kind of wasted resources because they're not making those connections, and that's really important. So, Nick, do you have any final piece of advice on how engineers can stay informed and actively participate in these initiatives to kind of stay ahead in their own practices?
Yeah, sure. So the most important thing is really to engage yourself internally within your own firm. We have an internal website that is just full of technical chatter all day, people looking for problem-solving advice. But really taking it back a little bit, the most important piece of advice I have is that you want to, throughout your entire career, starting at day one, you want to continue to learn and educate yourself about the profession, but also teach people. And you want to be sure you are in a place that supports that. And I have an anecdote that, I tell whenever I need to illustrate this. As a young professional, when I first got out of school, I had an interview at a firm in upstate New York, and I asked the gentleman who was interviewing me, "Hey, Cornell is right up the road. It's a wonderful school. I'm sure we can go over there and take classes." And he said, "Well, actually, no, because we really don't like to spend the money to train our people, and then they just up and leave." And, I was kind of disappointed, and they never offered me a job anyway. But, thinking about it years later, is the gentleman really told me everything I needed to know about the organization right there and then. So you really want to be in a place where you can learn, where you can engage yourself, and where that is supported. So, really from day one, you want to be, not just learning, but giving back to your community, be that through mentoring and teaching. As engineers, our code of ethics actually obligates us not just to keep our own skills up, but to educate the public at large about what we're doing, about our profession. So we take this pretty seriously. At SGH, we actually have a requirement once you become a mid to senior person that you have to be professionally engaged. And that is, in many ways altruistic, because we want to contribute to society, but also because it drives innovation. Because innovation really comes from seeing others do interesting things, others in adjacent fields or far from us fields, and then bringing that skill and bringing that to your own job. So my advice is really be a great skilled technician, but look beyond your own firm, your own interest to experiences that enrich what you're doing.
That's great. No, I like that message a lot. And you kind of reminded me of that saying is, what if we train and upskill our professionals and they leave the company, but on the flip side, what if we don't train them and they stay? Right.
Absolutely.
So it's always a good reminder. But well, listen, I just want to thank Nick again. We're talking to Nick Vigener, Senior Principal and Chief Technical Officer at Simpson Gumpertz Heger, or SGH. Nick, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and spending some time with us here on the Engineering Career Coach podcast.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Anthony.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Nick. It was really interesting to hear about the Research Center and some of the things that SGH is doing. And really what I hope that this episode does is kind of prompt you to think about how you can drive more innovation in your firm or your organization in your career. Please consider subscribing to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders.